Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Lin Hong. My preferred pronoun is she, her, hers. Hong is my last name. I teach Mandarin Chinese and the Chinese culture classes at the COCC. It's my honor to be the host of this event. First, let us welcome our ASL interpreter. During the event, live captions are available as well. Next, please allow me to share the land acknowledgement. The purpose of a land acknowledgement is to recognize and pay respect to the original inhabitants of the specific region. It's an opportunity to express gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you exist in. COCC Land Acknowledgement. COCC would like to acknowledge that the beautiful land our campus reside on are the original homeland of Wasako and the Warm Spring people. They ceded the land to the US government in the Treaty of 1855. The Paiute people were forcibly moved to the Warm Springs Indian Reservation starting in 1879. It's also important to note that a Klamath trade ran north through this region to the Great Salilo Falls trade grounds, and the Klamath tribes claim it as their own. Descendants of these original people were thriving members of our community today. We acknowledge and thank to the original steward of this land. Sorry about my pronunciation. Tonight, our panelists will all have a chance to speak and share their knowledge. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask all three panelists your questions. Please post any questions you have in the question and A option or menu on your screen. We will do the best we can to answer as many of your questions as possible. Okay, now please allow me to introduce our panelist, Ed Gore. Ed Gore from 2013 to 2017. Ed Gore served as the national president of Chinese American Citizens Alliance, established in 1895, and is the oldest Asian American civil rights organization in the US. He has integrated a career as a project engineer manager on successful chemical and refinery engineering project at the Jacobs Engineering Group, while also volunteering on boards of critical needs nonprofit organization. Having served for over 30 years in levels of increasing responsibility at the CACA, he had led the organization increasing the presence of CACA by redevelopment of chapters in Boston, Greater New York, and Las Vegas. Through the chapter formation in New York's Chinatown, a memorial scholarship fund was designed in honor of fallen NYPD detective Wen Jingliu, with its first two awards presented in 2017. To provide the most Harvey relief of many underserved in the Houston Asian community, he instituted fundraising campaign with CACA, AARP, and the local groups to address the still ongoing relief and recovery efforts. She now serves as National Program Director and the Board Liaison for the Chinese American World War II Veterans Recognition Project. to recognize the forgotten service of our Chinese American World War II veterans with the Congressional Gold Medal. A native Houstonian and a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin with a BS in electronic engineering. His personal story as the first generation Chinese American of immigrant parents mirrors that of many of the members of the CACA. He is married to Dr. Beverly Quinn Gore, who just retired from the City of Houston's Health and Human Services. They have a beautiful daughter, Rachel, son-in-law, Ben, and the three absolutely cutest grandchildren, Hallie, Austin, and Abigail.
Thank you, Lynn. I really appreciate your introduction. Let me just assure you that your English is 1,000% better than my Mandarin will ever be. So let me just thank you so much for going through that.
Thank you.
But it's a pleasure to be with those of you in Bend, Oregon, and across the country who are tuning into this. And it's an opportunity for me to even learn a little bit more about Bend, Oregon, which is something we're all going to do today. Learn about Bend, and of course. The Central Oregon Community College. And so myself as a STEM person, as you heard Lynn say, I'm an engineer by profession and background, but what I've done lately has nothing to do with engineering, but just dawned on me that I said, what are the programs that a community college offers in engineering? So of course I had to go to your website and see what's there. And the thing that caught me initially, my initially was, it says there, engineers like to solve problems. If there are no problems handily available, they will create their own problems. And so this is a Scott Adams quote that I can certainly identify with, because we are always a solution looking for a problem. And so that's the one thing that I would say is, brought me to the project that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later. But the other thing that caught my eye in your curriculum, in the engineering curriculum, was the career opportunities person who wrote this. And their last sentence was, in a few cases, a 1 or 2 year program in one of the engineering technologies is sufficient for employment. I said, wow, that sounds like me. 1 or 2 years. If I don't, I wouldn't have spent 5 years doing what I did if I could figure out 1 or 2 years for gainful employment. But let me just, thank the people here at Central Oregon Community College for giving us this time to talk about these things, because it's one thing for us to enter Bobcat country, but you guys in Bend, I just have to tell you, here in Texas, we have this area called Big Bend National Park. So that's something that we might have on you guys for the time being. I was a STEM person, and I just had to look at how this entire project of advocating for the Chinese American Congressional Gold Medal for our World War II veterans fit into my expertise. Because as engineers, we are not geared for advocacy work. We're not geared for policy making. We're not geared for shaking hands and rubbing elbows with people that, well, I really don't want to rub elbows with them, because politicians are not the right place to be sometimes to rub elbows with. But it is our job then sometimes as citizens of this country to do things like vote, find out about our political leaders and what makes them tick and what makes them vote for things that we want to vote for. So it's a challenge for us to look at our work as citizens to advocate for causes that we believe in. And in this case, in 2017, when this project was started, I was urged by many of my colleagues who also had advocated for the Congressional Gold Medals for Filipino American as well as the Nisei, the Japanese. And over the years, of course, we've had many other Congressional Gold Medals awarded to, first of all, of course, George Washington. And as far as the others in World War II, we've had the Tuskegee Airmen, we've had the Native American Code Talkers. So many groups have been identified, but why is it that these are special groups that have been identified for the Congressional Gold Medal? I think that's one of the questions we're going to ask ourselves today, is why is it special that these groups, these men, these women, served for our country in World War II? Well, none of that makes any sense if you think about trying to immerse myself into the arena of what is history for us. Well, let me say that in a nutshell. I spent the last 4 years volunteering to do this project. Yeah, even when I was working, there are some days in doing this project I felt like I should go back to work so I'd have some rest. But this has been a very challenging project for us, because to try to advocate on the Hill, I think someone has told me that over 30,000 bills are introduced into Congress every session. And a session is, of course, 2 years, and very, very few of them make it out as law. So fortunately, in the 2 years that we're able to do this, and it's a miraculous 2 years that we're able to introduce the bill in May of 2017, and actually have it passed and signed into law by President Trump at the end of 2018, at the very end of 2018, it was one of these things that caused us to wonder, wow, this is a miraculous effort for us. But why did I do this? I'm not a veteran. I'm not in the military. But I will say that one of the reasons, as Lynn just mentioned, why I was able to get a degree and go to college, because I had two middle school friends who actually, instead of going to college, they chose to go to the military during the Vietnam period, and neither made it back from the war. So that caused me to believe a lot of things about myself, that those guys gave their lives so I could go to college. And so at some point throughout my working career, I decided to do something myself, or try to engage others to where I would bring back some kind of service. And so I think in the last 4 years, I have tried to make that happen, and I did not know if this was going to be a successful project or not, but I was dedicated to move forward with doing these kind of things. So this evening we're going to talk and spend a few minutes talking about why the Congressional Gold Medal for Chinese American World War II veterans, and General Bill Chin will speak more to that during his talk. But I think it's important for us to look at some of the accomplishments today of Asian Americans, and also in history. What made these people do these things? Because I think in the back of their minds, we all want to see a successful country. Our contributions contribute to the success of the country. Because one of the things that we'll always know about is that we say that there's Chinese American history, there's Filipino American history, there is Anglo-Saxon history as well. But if we really come to think about it, all of it is American history. It's just that some of our stories have not been told, they've not been heard, they've not been documented, and they've not been taught to the people about what we've done. Every story, regardless of race, ethnicity, is part of American history if we're contributing towards the success of our country. So if you can sit there and answer these questions one day and figure out, well, why don't we read more about it? Why don't we hear more about it? Why don't we get taught more about other history and the contributions of others? I don't know. I'm just a STEM person. Thank you. We'll talk about that during the question and answer period. It's a real pleasure for me now to introduce Major General William S. Chin. I cannot say so many things about Bill, but he has been a 32-year member of the U.S. military, the Army. And when I tried to talk about Bill, it's impossible not to go to the superlatives, because he's the first Chinese American two-star general. Now, I have to say, though, that Bill is a graduate of the University of Michigan. Now, like most of us, like his famous alumni, Tom Brady, Bill was not drafted by the NFL this last week either, nor was he drafted by the Army. What Bill did was he became a second lieutenant straight out of college, finishing up his ROTC program. So Bill, you were never drafted, you didn't enlist, but you went straight for the military. Bill's family also has a legacy and history of serving our country. His father, Moon Chin, is a World War II veteran and a Congressional Gold Medal recipient. He also has a brother, now deceased, Bob Chin, who also served in the Army. But I think most proudly for all of us as Chinese Americans is his niece, Deborah, is a Black Hawk helicopter pilot and still serving in the Army. So Bill, thank you so much for your service to our country, and let me turn it over to you at this time.
Hey, Ed, thank you for that nice introduction. The title of my presentation is the first two major contributions made by Chinese in the United States. And so the first major contribution is building the Transcontinental Railroad. The second major contribution are the Chinese American World War II veterans that served and fought in World War II. Next chart, please. This is an outline of my presentation. So I'll highlight the contributions. I'll talk about the accomplishments, but more importantly, what the accomplishments resulted in terms of opening up opportunities and opening up the outcome of the contributions. I'll talk about recognition and honoring, and I'll close by an epilogue. Next chart. So here are the two major contributions, but progress in recognition has been slow. And so for both groups, they were largely forgotten, ignored, and excluded. But they are unsung heroes. And for all Americans, it's important for us to know, understand, and honor their history and legacy. Next chart. Okay, building the Transcontinental Railroad. If you focus on the picture at the far right, that's what I call the iconic photo of where the Central Pacific Railroad coming from the west to the east met up with the Union Pacific Railroad that came from east to west. And this photo is iconic because you see everybody in the picture, and where Chinese railroad workers largely built the segment from west to east, you cannot see any Chinese railroad workers in the photo. Now, Stanford University did a study on Chinese railroad workers in North America. And based upon a detailed look of this photo, if you start from the lower left-hand corner and go diagonally up before you get to the center, there's a man whose back is to the camera. And so Stanford University appears to confirm that, yes, there was one Chinese railroad worker in the photo. But as I said before, they were largely ignored, forgotten, and excluded. Now, worse yet is the 100th anniversary in May of 1969. The Secretary of Transportation gave a presentation, and his words were, "Who else but Americans could have laid 10 miles of track in 12 hours, could chisel through miles of solid granite, and drill 10 tunnels?" Well, those that did that were Chinese railroad workers, but there was no acknowledgement by the Secretary of Transportation that it was the Chinese railroad workers that did what he cited. Worse yet, on that 100th anniversary, there was a representative from the Chinese Historical Society of America who was scheduled to speak, but at the last minute, he was snubbed and he was scratched from the agenda. So in my words, I would say that May 10th, 1969, at the 100th anniversary, that this was a day of infamy. It wasn't until the 145th anniversary in May of 2014 that the Department of Labor held a ceremony and inducted Chinese railroad workers into its Hall of Honor. And at the 150th anniversary, May 10, 2019, all the speakers, all the VIPs that spoke fully recognized and honored the Chinese railroad workers. And I was there at that ceremony on May 10th, 2019. Next chart. So what was accomplished in building that Transcontinental Railroad. The workers blasted through tunnels. The picture at the right shows one of those tunnels. And the workers, of course, used dynamite at times, but largely the tools that they used were hand tools in picking away at the granite and building that tunnel. And of course, the harshest area was going through the Sierra Nevada mountains in the wintertime. And then once they got to the Utah desert, it was the hot Utah desert. So Chinese railroad workers endured the hard labor, sacrifice, and risk of life. You've probably heard stories about Chinese railroad workers lowered in baskets to lay the dynamite and then kick off the detonation, and they would be lucky to survive. They faced prejudice, discrimination, physical abuse. They had longer hours than white laborers and were paid lower wages. At the same time, they had to provide for their own food and accommodations. But this is our Chinese American pioneering efforts. This is our history, heritage, and the legacy of progress. And you'll hear me talk later about this legacy of progress initially started by Chinese railroad workers. Next chart. So what were the opportunities that were opened up? It was President Lincoln that started the Transcontinental Railroad. And so by having the Transcontinental Railroad, it unified the country and healed the nation with direct access, both sides of the country from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And of course, with that was trade, commerce, economic development, facilitating travel, transportation, and tourism. And there was a period immediately after the building of the Transcontinental Railroad that Chinese railroad workers were looked upon, they were praised. They continued working on other railroads and other construction projects. And then as they completed, they settled across the country. They built businesses, they bettered their lives, and they continue this legacy of progress. But the Chinese railroad workers were seen as racially inferior, as competitors, and they created resentment that led to the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which specifically barred the immigration of laborers. Laborers that were already in the country were denied citizenship. They had no rights, no homesteading, no citizenship. Next chart. Okay, let me transition to serving and fighting in World War II. In World War II, there were approximately 20,000 Chinese Americans that served. They were either drafted or they volunteered. They were awarded every award for valor, up to and including the Congressional Medal of Honor. They served in every theater of war, every branch of service, and they were predominantly integrated into the U.S. Armed Services. And this contrasts with other groups. Nisei, or Japanese Americans, fought in segregated units. Black soldiers, Tuskegee Airmen, were in segregated units. And so Chinese Americans predominantly were integrated with the U.S. Armed Services. There was the Chinese, the 14th Air Force Air Service Group that was segregated, and also the 987th Signal Company. So of the 20,000 that served, about 40% were non-citizens, yet they proudly served as Americans, and they served in spite of the discriminatory aspects of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was not repealed until December of 1943. So what is it that our Chinese American veterans do? They defended the freedom that we now so much enjoy, and they proudly served as Americans. Now, shown in red at the bottom of the chart is a direct quote from the public law that approved the award of the Congressional Gold Medal to Chinese American World War II veterans, that they demonstrated highly uncommon and commendable sense of patriotism and honor in face of discrimination. Next chart. So, what were the opportunities that were opened up by Chinese American World War II veterans? Before World War II, Chinese in America largely lived isolated lives across the country, for example, in Chinatowns across the country or in rural areas by themselves. Based upon World War II, they made known to the American public who Chinese Americans were. They contributed in walks of life that were previously not open to Chinese Americans. And they paved the way for future generations to serve in the United States Armed Services. And for Asian Americans and Chinese Americans, they opened up opportunities for them to be a part of mainstream America post-World War II. And through the hard work and sacrifice of our Chinese American World War II veterans, they enabled the follow-on generations to live the American dream. Now, I've reviewed bios and histories of a lot of our Chinese American World War II veterans. And the common thread is they came back from the war, they worked hard, they used the GI Bill to improve themselves, and they worked hard such that the follow-on generations would attend college, buy a home, and live that American dream. The other important aspect of Chinese American World War II veterans is they continue that legacy of progress that was initially established by Chinese railroad workers. Now, you have heard of the World War II generation as the greatest generation, but you've probably not heard those that talk about the greatest generation talk about Chinese Americans as a part of that. And so that's another part of that history where they were forgotten, ignored, or excluded. Next chart. Now, there are stories to be told of our Chinese railroad workers and World War II veterans, and I'd like to go through examples of 3 Chinese railroad workers and then their descendants. For example, in these descendants here, they were all American born. They were in the 14th Air Force Flying Tigers in World War II. 2 of them were pilots. I'll talk about them later. 1 was a communications officer. 2 were in the US Army Air Forces, and 1 was in the Chinese Air Force, and I'll talk about that a little later. Now, this is all based upon an article I wrote in 2017 that was entitled "From Railroad Workers to Flying Tigers, A Legacy of Progress." Next chart. Okay, this chart is a little complicated, but I'll talk you through it. On the right-hand side, you'll see from Dongguan, later on from Zhongshan, and from Hoiping. Those are villages in the southern part of China from Guangdong province. And so all 3 railroad workers here came from Guangdong province. First is Qinlin Su, who was a foreman and labor contractor for the Central Pacific Railroad. And so by a foreman, that meant he was a supervisor. He had to interface with the railroad supervisors. So his English was quite good. And he had laborers then that worked for him. When the railroad was finished, he then worked in mining in Colorado. He was able to bring his wife from China. And the good thing about the state of Colorado is they memorialized him and acknowledged him as a Colorado pioneer. For example, their daughter, a beautiful young daughter, became the first Chinese American to be born in the state of Ohio. Next is Jim King, again, also a foreman and labor contractor. So he had a group of Chinese railroad workers who worked for him, and his English was also good, where he was able to interface with the railroad supervisors. When the railroad was finished, he went to the Sacramento Delta area with his Chinese railroad workers, and they built the levees that you see there in the Sacramento Delta. Later on, he became a tenant farmer. He met his wife in San Francisco and raised a family. The third Chinese railroad worker there, Chan Fong, also known as Li Chan, was my grandfather. And he worked on the second Transcontinental Railroad, which went from California, Los Angeles area to El Paso, Texas. The railroad was completed in 1881 and the workers were released. In the case of my grandfather, he migrated to Mississippi, later on to North Carolina and Ohio. He had a Chinese laundry in North Carolina. And interesting enough, he and my grandmother and the first two kids were written up in the Salisbury, North Carolina newspaper. But because of vandalism at the laundry, it got too bad and he had to move up north to Ohio, and that's where my father was born. But in this case, all our railroad workers then settled down, had families, and certainly became Americans. Next chart. Okay, Chin Lin Soong's descendant was First Lieutenant W.C. Chen, third generation American-born Chinese, and he was assigned to the 23rd Fighter Group, 14th Air Force, China-Burma Indo Theater as a communications officer. So today, when you think about the importance of communications, cryptography, which is codes, and he was, as a lieutenant, a communications officer and crypto security officer, that's a significant responsibility. When he returned after the war, he helped to found and was the post commander of the American Legion Cathay Post in Denver. And he was very proud of serving as a Flying Tiger. And every time he went out, he always pinned on his lapel, on one side, the American flag, the other side, a Flying Tiger pin. Next chart. Captain Bill King, grandson of Jim King, again, a third generation American-born Chinese. But in his case, in 1939, he wanted to serve in the US Army Air Forces, but was denied because of race. And so in 1939, where there was the Sino-Japanese War going on in China, he volunteered to fly for the Chinese Air Force. He was a fighter pilot assigned to the 14th Air Force in the Chinese American Composite Wing. Now, the Chinese American Composite Wing is not a wing comprised of Americans of Chinese origin, but rather Chinese American means a mix of Chinese Air Force and American Air Force pilots organized in this composite wing. In the case of Bill King, he was a fighter pilot. He flew 109 combat missions, and he was awarded 3 U.S. Distinguished Flying Crosses and the Presidential Unit Citation. His hometown was Locke, California, and he returned from the war and worked for General Mills. So he was highly decorated. Next chart. Okay, this is my father, Moon Chen, second generation, American born. He graduated from the University of Michigan in 1932 in aeronautical engineering. But he couldn't find a job. Number one, it was the Depression. Number two, aircraft companies at that time were not hiring Orientals, even though they were American born. But that did not deter him. He had a passion for aviation. He saved up enough money and got a commercial pilot's license. Initially, he flew across the country for the US Mail Service in one of these open cockpit biplanes. And then in 1936, he went to China and flew for an airline called CNAC, China National Aviation Corporation. And later on, he worked for a company called Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company, CAMCO. Now, some of you may have heard of Claire Chennault and the American Volunteer Group, who volunteered to go and they fought in China. All those that were part of the American Volunteer Group, to include General Chennault, were employees of CAMCO. So CAMCO was the employer of record for all those American Volunteer Group pilots and ground crew that were the original Flying Tigers. My father joined the U.S. Army Air Forces after Pearl Harbor. He flew the hump, and he also worked for General Chennault. Later on, General Chennault formed up an airline after the war there, and my father continued working for Chennault, became an airline executive, and later on he worked for Northrop Aircraft Company. Now, I like to use on a liberal basis the terminology story arc. When we talk about Chinese railroad workers and their final recognition, we could say that the story arc for Chinese railroad workers were completed at the 150th anniversary when they were fully honored and recognized. In the case of Chinese American World War II veterans, their story arc was completed with the award of the Congressional Gold Medal. In my father's case, I would say, with the experience that he had of initially being not hireable by an aircraft company, later on becoming an airline pilot, becoming a military pilot, then becoming employed as an executive working for an aircraft company, that his story arc was completed when he began to work then and was hired by Northrop Aircraft Company. Next chart. So in terms of recognition and honoring, as I mentioned, finally, Chinese rail workers were recognized at the 150th anniversary. And then on December 9th, when the Speaker of the House held a ceremony for the award of the Congressional Gold Medal to Chinese American workers, the Chinese American World War II veterans, that they finally got their recognition, or though it was late, 75 years after the official end of World War II. Next chart. Okay, so what are the observations that we can make? That there is the history of our forefathers that endured hardship, danger, and risk of life, but they became a part of the communities here in the United States, and they established a legacy of progress for follow-on generations to follow. And so, same with the Chinese American World War II veterans. And so, what we need to do is to remember, honor, and preserve the legacy of our Chinese railroad workers and our Chinese American World War II veterans. Next chart. Okay, where are we today? Well, certainly there have been waves and waves of immigration to the United States by Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. What we see today, though, is an ascendancy of Asian Pacific American and Pacific Islanders. We've had Nobel Prize winners, members of Congress, cabinet members, governors, mayors, judges, leaders in academia, all sorts of leaders in arts and sciences, CEOs, lawyers, doctors, dentists, generals and admirals. And so why is that? It's because of America. It's because of the freedom that we have in America, the rule of law, and the land of opportunity. And with that, Ed, I'll turn it back over to you. Unmute.
Ed, unmute. Ed, unmute.
Sorry, Bill. Thank you so much. I was just getting ready to say I was bragging so much about all the things you've done, I forgot to unmute myself. But I was just saying every time I hear that, I do learn something new about the story arc. And I just want to say, if there's a way for us to say, let's give it up for Bill Chin and applaud, I would say it that way. But just zoom it up for Bill Chin. Let's zoom it up for Bill Chin. Thank you so much, Bill. Appreciate that so much. Our next panelist is Lita Peterson. So Lita is the president of the Connected International Meeting Professionals Association, CIMPA. She's had over 15 years of event planning experience. And the one thing I'll say about Lita is she's not very well known. Well, why is that? It's not because she's not an excellent event planner, but let me just give you my experience of any kind of event I've ever been to. If an event goes well, it's because you've had a really good, competent event planner. If the event doesn't go well, everybody knows who the event planner is, because that person will be called on the carpet for everything that went wrong. So let me just say that in the couple of years I've worked with Lita on the Chinese American World War II Congressional Gold Medal Project, and she's also planning our events not only in Washington, D.C., when we had the national ceremony of the presentation of the Congressional Gold Medal there in September. Lita's been helping us throughout this entire process. And let me just say that she is a wonderful person to work with, a wonderful event planner. She's also on the advisory board of the Devotion to Children, a member of the board of directors of the Pan-Pacific Asian American Leaders and Mentors, and a member of the executive committee of our sister organization, our likewise organization, the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project. Please welcome Lita Peterson.
Thank you, Ed. Good evening. My name is Lita Peterson. I am an event planner who has the privilege and honor to work with organizations like the Chinese American World War II Veterans Recognition Project and the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project. Before I proceed, I would like to first thank Christy Walker and Lynn Hong for putting together this forum and allowing us to talk about Asian contributions to the history of this nation. Today, I will focus on the contributions of World War II veterans, specifically Filipino Americans. The best way to do that is to introduce the work of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project. The link to learn more is philvetrep.org. PhilVetRep, as it is commonly known, is an all-volunteer national initiative whose mission is to raise awareness through academic research and public information and to obtain national recognition of Filipino, Filipino American, and American World War II soldiers across the United States and the Philippines for their wartime service to the US and the Philippines from July 1941 to December 1946. It is headed by Major General Tony Taguba, US Army retired. This project consists of two phases. Phase one is the passage of the Congressional Gold Medal. The Congressional Gold Medal is the highest civilian award bestowed by the US Congress to an individual or group that contributed to American culture and history. This was accomplished on November 30th, 2016, when the US Congress passed final legislation granting the Congressional Gold Medal Award to Filipino and American veterans of World War II. The measure was signed into law by President Obama on December 14th, 2016. On October 25th, 2017, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan formally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to World War II veterans represented by a 100-year-old World War II veteran and three next of kin at a formal ceremony at Emancipation Hall in the US Congress. By the way, the 100-year-old is now 104 years old and he's still with us. It is also important to note that the law awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to the Chinese American veterans of World War II passed on December 20th, 2018. And as Bill said, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, in a virtual ceremony on December 9, 2020, also formally awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to all World War II veterans represented by a 102-year-old World War II veteran. The link to learn more is caww2.org. In addition, on August 2nd, 2010, the bill to award the Congressional Gold Medal to the Nisei soldiers of the 100th Infantry Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and Military Intelligence Service was unanimously passed in both the Senate and House of Representatives. These brave Japanese American soldiers faced a two-fronted battle of discrimination, both at home and in the battlefield abroad. A formal awarding of the Congressional Gold Medal to the Nisei soldiers was held at Emancipation Hall on November 2nd, 2010. The link to learn more is cgm.smithsonianapa.org. For the recipients of the Congressional Gold Medal, this medal symbolizes their family's history to memorialize the selfless sacrifice their father, grandfather, uncle, brother, sister, and mother's desperate and courageous experience to defend and protect their lives so their generation can live today and in the future. PhilVetRep has conducted 82 medal ceremonies and awarded over 3,000 medals thus far and hope to award another 5,000 more to the remaining living veterans in the next few years. Sadly, most of the living veterans have passed away or will pass away before we can honor them with this medal. Phase two is to develop and launch a national digital education program to educate the American public and raise national awareness on the outstanding accomplishments of the Filipino and American soldiers who achieved victory over the Japanese imperial forces in defense of the United States in World War II. Phase two is currently underway. We launched a digital online exhibition on November 6, 2020, called Duty to Country. The link is dutytocountry.org. It features the untold stories of sacrifices and heroism of Filipino soldiers. It contains oral history of World War II veterans, next of kin, and advocates. It also contains dozens of animations and illustrations that bring their story to life. This website has received 3 awards so far in 2021 for education and activism and as a resource for general audience and families. The principal objective of Duty to Country Education Project is to reach the classroom in elementary schools, high schools, and colleges and universities in 2021 and beyond. Late this year, an online education resource will accompany the exhibition and the oral histories. It will aid teachers in the classroom interested in bringing awareness to the Filipino story during World War II and beyond. Primary documents will be used to educate students on the civil rights issues of the Rescission Act of 1946. Lesson plans and activities will align with curriculum standards. What is the Rescission Act of 1949, you might ask? In February 1946, the 79th Congress passed the Rescission Act of 1946, denying the status of active service to over 200,000 Filipino men and women soldiers and guerrillas. It revoked their promised benefits and took away their opportunity for American citizenship. This created a feeling of indignation and injustice amongst these veterans that still lingers to this day. The undeniable proof is that 57,000 soldiers were killed in action, thousands more wounded for life, and thousands missing in action. These brave people did exist, an irrefutable and profound historical fact. This law is currently still in existence. An organizational effort is currently underway to repeal and remove this law from the US Code because, as my good friend John Melagrido, the Executive Secretary of PhilVetRep says, as long as the Rescission Act is still in place, this story is not over. A similar law was passed discriminating Chinese citizens from becoming US citizens. As you heard from Bill Chen, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 suspended Chinese immigration and declared Chinese immigrants ineligible for naturalization. Chinese immigrants and their American-born families remained ineligible for citizenship until December 17, 1943, when the Magnuson Act was signed into law. This act allowed Chinese immigration and permitted some Chinese immigrants already residing in the country to become naturalized citizens. The attack on Pearl Harbor launched a rash of fear about national security, especially on the West Coast. In February 1942, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 that resulted in the internment of Japanese Americans. The order authorized the Secretary of War and military commanders to evacuate all persons deemed a threat from the West Coast to internment camps and the government called relocation centers further inland. Nearly 70,000 of the evacuees were American citizens. There were no charges of disloyalty against any of the citizens, nor was there any vehicle by which they could appeal their loss of property and personal liberty. In 1988, Congress passed and President Reagan signed Public Law 100-383 that acknowledged the injustice of internment, apologized for it, and provided a $20,000 cash payment to each person who was interned. My message to you today is that we should learn from the post-war struggles of the veterans that ordinary people can change the law by speaking out, educating others, and building broad coalitions. Filipino World War II veterans, Chinese American World War II veterans, Japanese American World War II veterans, and their advocates have rewritten history. The task now remains for us to remember and honor that history. I believe that these stories need to be told and should be part of the American history that are taught in the classrooms today. I believe that education is the key to quelling anti-Asian hate. Thank you for letting me tell this story, and thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you so much, Lita. Another zoom it up for Lita Peterson, please. Thank you so much, Lita.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So much. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Ms. Peterson and General Chen. And audience, please keep sending your questions. And we got our first question. This question is for Mr. Gore. The question is, how do you think the historical events of how Chinese Americans contributed to the ongoing development of our country can help others reframe their views of Asians as seeming outsiders?
You know, I look at that question, and I think we have a lot of that going on still today. Is that, you know, I'll put it this way. I think it's interesting that even though we look different, we really don't think differently than anyone else in the country. As Americans, I want to pay less taxes. I want to have better food. I want to have a pay raise. I want to have a job. I want to get my streets fixed. I want all the things that everyone else has, and I will also complain about all the other things people complain about. But because we look differently, people don't seem to identify with us. And I think in the terms of the fact that we're only about, maybe the next census will say we're about 8% of the country. In some parts of the world, country, we're more than that even. Yet we still seem to encounter areas where we are looked at as outsiders just because we look differently. And that is really the only thing. Other than that, there are good Asian people, there are bad Asian people, there are good Germans, there are good Japanese, but there are also bad Germans and bad Japanese. So we cover a realm of human behavior that has really nothing to do with our ethnicity. But I think what we've got to do, what we should do, again, is highlight the things that we all have in common when we come to the country, is to try to contribute in our own way, whether it's through the hard work of the Chinese road workers, whether it's through the loyalty and bravery and patriotism of a person who serves in the U.S. military to defend our country, to defend our democracy, to defend our rights and the principles that we've all come to live under, or whether it's just someone who goes to work every day and provides for their family. And that's all they need to do, and that's all they want to do. This is the whole thing we want to say. So are our contributions better or worse than anyone else? I won't say worse at all. And I wouldn't necessarily say better at all. I think it's mostly the fact that we're all contributing to the common good of the country. So I think the more we highlight these things, and I think Lita said it very well earlier, is that we need to have more education about it, because one of the things as I went through public school is that most of our history was not comprehensive. It was predominantly European history that we learned about. Nothing wrong with that, except, you know, even here in Texas, our legislature requires that we have a semester of Texas history. So every part of our country can be covered at some point in time, but I think just the contributions of Chinese Americans or all Asian Americans as they come to the country to contribute can be brought to light through education.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gore. And I want to ask if General Chen, if you have anything you want to add to?
Well, there's not much we can do with our skin color, but what we need to do is we need to, and I like to use the expression, to blend in while standing out. This can happen in a classroom if you're a student. This can happen in your work environment, whatever. There's no question that you already stand out because of your skin color. You should make an effort so that whatever you say, whatever conduct, mannerisms that you have, that you display excellence, because you know that you will be observed and you know you will be known. And so you can establish good credibility based upon your actions. And it's amazing what you will find, because you will then establish your reputation. And then if you're in the work environment, the bosses that you have, they know you, and they will give you the tough assignments that challenge you. And then you can show them what you can do. And get promotions.
Thank you so much. We got another question. This question is for General Chen. A lot of what we heard today about Asian American contributions to the United States is not generally known to the American public. What does it take to make known to the American public about these Asian American contributions?
Well, I think Lita covered it. It's education. However, it's a very difficult thing because if you talk about our American K through 12 system, how do you change the curriculum? There's in some cases nobody in charge, or in some cases there are too many people in charge that you cannot get to the right person to get the focus that is needed. And so education in the classroom, certainly by having coverage of the American history that involves some of these minority groups, that's important. The other thing, of course, is in every family, in the upbringing, in the learning of values, of how to treat people, that's important too. But if we really want to have more coverage of the history that has been either ignored or excluded, there's got to be a more conscious effort in education.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And just tonight our attendance, our participants are many the professor from COCC and also teachers from K-12. And I know many teachers give their students extra credits, but if they come to join us tonight. So I think we are doing something. We already start.
Yes.
Okay, next question is for Ms. Peterson. Does the Congressional Gold Medal include mandatory benefits? How do I apply for the medal if I have a family member eligible to receive it?
Yes. So the first part of that question is the Congressional Gold Medal have monetary benefit? No, it does not. It's an honor that the Congress is given to this group of people. So it's just an honor. It's a medal, and it's a very solemn recognition of their service, and that's what the medal is about. And the second part of your question is how do you apply for it? Again, if there the philvetrep.org website, you'll get all the information there. Or if they're Chinese American, then you go to the CAWW2.org. All the information is there, forms to fill, etc.
Great. Okay, next question is for all of you. Do you think the myth of model minority for Chinese prevent Asians from getting social, economic, and educational justice?
Maybe I need to figure out, are they saying that because we are deemed to be, people view us as a mild minority, in other words, we have excelled, or we have more advantages, or we are whatever it is, that we're so bright and we're so great and wonderful that we're denied social justice because we're supposed to be that smart? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. My personal experience is sometimes they think Asian kids always can figure out the math question. They should not have a question for their teachers, and they don't need extra support. And also at the COCC, we have some programs to support Indian American students and the Latino students. So far, we don't have a similar program for our Asian American students, and we're working on that. So that's the question.
Okay. Well, let me take it first, if you don't mind. What I think has happened in the past years is because there were so few Asian Americans in the country. Well, let's just say Chinese Americans for the time being. There were so few Chinese Americans in the country for a long time, is that parents dwelled into their children that you must have an education, you must get an education. That is the only way out of the gold mine or out of the salt mines. My dad had a grocery store, and I can tell you, having to work there, and when I say volunteer, I don't mean volunteer. I mean, did we get paid? No, of course. He says you're not eating until you work at the store for so many hours. So I think the struggle is that I saw what my dad and mother had to do, working side by side, literally 12 to 16 hours a day in a business that supported six to seven children to go to college, but they deemed it necessary to go to college, to get an education. But I can tell you one thing for myself. After working in that store, I didn't want to work in that store anymore. I was determined not to go to college and get an education. Now, it's much different. But let me just address the other issue about the model minority. I can tell you, if you go into any group and you get enough of a cross section and the model of all the people in that particular ethnicity, they probably don't fall too much outside the regular bell curve you see of people. 10% are not very bright, 10% are very, very bright. Everybody else kind of falls in that middle category. But what people have done, or others have done, some have done, is they have only identified the 10% that are in the excellent category, that category that everybody wants to look at. And then they determine that all Asians are like that, which is unfair. Because we know today there are many groups, not necessarily Chinese, not necessarily Japanese, but a lot of people from Vietnam, from Burma, from other parts of the world in Asia who are definitely not advantaged in any way. And they're refugees who come to the country. Yet our system, unfortunately, lumps everyone together so that it appears as though all Asians are doing well. So yes, it's definitely a myth. And do we not get social justice? I think, unfortunately, it's kind of it's a curse, I guess, being called model minority, because everybody says, well, those Asians, they can figure it out. They'll be able to advance regardless if I discriminate against them or I do things that don't cause them to get promotions. So I think this is part of the issue that we're still dealing with today as far as even social justice issues. And let me just address one thing, because I know in the courtroom this has happened before, is that in many cases you don't know how the jury is going to find if an Asian person is on trial, because some of those prejudices really come out, I think. Now, I can also argue that African American families have had the same issues in the judicial system, is that it doesn't seem fair to them either. But, people bring the jury system, and I've served on juries, and please, I'm going to make this pitch for serving on jury. You must serve on jury if you're ever called, because you have no one to complain to if you're not tried by a jury of your peers, because you have an opportunity to help 11 other people in the jury panel decide what happens to your life at that point. But no, that's a good question. I don't think that helps us to be labeled the minority at all, that we're going to get the justice that we really are fighting for.
Thank you so much. And General Chen, please.
Well, there's one word that he said. Now, if somebody starts talking about model minority, I think the first thing to counter is it's a myth. Because within Asian American, the population and so forth, there's a full range of those that are economically well off, as well as at the other extreme. There's the full spectrum of those that go to elite colleges versus those that don't. And so there is no such thing as a model minority.
Thank you. Okay, we will take two more questions. Next question is my it's my favorite. I like so much. Are there any stories recorded of Asian American women contributions?
Yes, actually, if you go to dutytocountry.org, we have oral history of even women guerrillas that have fought in World War II. And so, yes, there are quite a bit of them. And I urge you to go to that site because it not only tells the story, it's oral history from actual World War II veterans that are in there, and there's animations, so it's not as boring as you'd think. But there's also some other places where you can find these stories. Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. And there, this is a this is a question I'll ask. Thank you so much for sharing so many wonderful resources. Would you please share the links?
Yes, Christy, do you have the links I sent you? Because we do have, yes. So
Okay.
here are the links of all the resources I mentioned in my presentation earlier. So go to these sites and you will learn a lot more than we've only hit the surface of this. And if you go here, you'll get a lot more information.
Okay. Last question for all of you. Given all of what we know now, why do you think there is still so much resistance in acknowledging Asian American and the Pacific Islanders' contribution? In other words, why do you think this form of this discrimination, of this discrimination still exists? What can we do about it?
Lita, you go first.
Okay. Well, again, I don't know that the question that the sentence about knowing what we know now, I don't think that there's enough knowledge out there. I think that there's still quite a lot to learn about Asian American and Pacific Islanders contributions, and these are not being taught in the schools, and that is the reason why no one knows about it. And so being ignorant about these contributions and the 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 things that we've done for this country is ignored, and that's why. That's all I can say is there's not enough education, and that we should talk about this in the classrooms.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, I think all of us need to speak up in terms of issues of the day, in terms of opportunities to speak up, to speak on behalf of conveying contributions of Asian Pacific American Islanders. I also think that uh, what's important is individuals in our community, in our workplace, in our environment need to better integrate and mix with everybody. So, don't just stick around with your group of Filipino Americans or Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, but by mixing and integrating, there'll be a better understanding and appreciation of everybody and their values, the conduct, and so forth. And that can help in eliminating this hate situation that we have.
Well, Lynn, I think one of the things that we don't have enough of course, we have enough stories. We just don't have enough developed curriculum that is available to the public school arena. It takes so long for state legislatures to approve textbooks, to approve curriculum today. It's almost as if, and I think many minority communities do this well, and I'll just speak to the Chinese community, is one of the things that my parents used to do was they used to send me to Chinese school. because my mother spoke only Cantonese, Taisan, and my father spoke the most English. So if we wanted to communicate with my mother, we had to speak to her in our native tongue. And so what happens is that they would send us off to Chinese school to learn Chinese. Well, I can tell you right now, I am a Chinese school dropout. So Lynn, you have no hope for me to go to your Mandarin class right there. So what it amounts to is that while we're trying to figure out ways to assimilate into society, we're also trying to figure out ways as people who are literally, in most cases for first generation, bicultural. We're trying to figure out, well, am I trying to fit in with all my friends, or is my mother going to be mad at me if I don't use chopsticks today to eat? So I think that's part of the curriculum effort we need to concentrate on. Get the curriculum developed, and we have stories. We have plenty of stories. We just need educators to put the curriculum together for us, or to make that a priority to happen in our communities. So, how do we do this? Bill said it almost perfectly. It is almost incumbent upon us as the 6 or 7 or 8% of the country to introduce ourselves as good neighbors, as people in the community who serve, as people in the community who contribute, as people to help in the safety of the community, to help with projects such as hurricanes and floods that we have here in Texas. I would much rather have, I don't know if you heard the Cajun Navy, they're from Louisiana. I would much rather have a Cajun Navy guy with a fifth grade education try to rescue me from a flood in his little boat than to have no offense to Stanford people now, but to have a Stanford educated MBA trying to figure out, now let's see, can I build a boat right now so I can pick this guy up, and how much will it cost me? So I think it's a matter of just deciding what are the resources that we as Chinese Americans can bring to the neighborhood. And that's really what it's about. That's where it has to start, in the neighborhoods. And so if I want to move to Bend, Oregon, I want to know that it's safe. I want to know that the people there are friendly. I want to know that the streets are clean, and I can find a really economical place to shop. I might still need a Chinese store there too to get my groceries. But let me just say, for all the communities that we all live in, whether we're 1%, 5%, or 25%, as many are in California, it's up to us to try to make the things better so that people understand who we are. As I said, we may look differently, but we really don't think differently.
Mhm. Yep,
Great. I would like to invite all of you come to visit me and all the COCC faculties, and you will see in Bend, the street is clean. People are super friendly, and you can find some good Chinese food here as well. I have to add one more question, and General Chen, audience wants to know what is the background in your screen?
Oh, the background, my virtual background?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. It's a book that we put together in Boston. CACA Boston sponsored it, but it's entitled Unsung Heroes, Recognizing and Honoring Chinese American World War II Veterans. And so it's a book that talks about the involvement and contributions of Chinese American veterans across the country, not limited to New England. And so it's a compilation of articles. And for example, we have articles that talk about the first Asian American admiral who was a commander in the US Navy in World War II. We have a story about a lieutenant in the Air Force that flew the hump, and later on he became the first Air Force Chinese American general. We have a story about the Medal of Honor winner. We have other stories about notables, as well as some soldiers that, one is a US Army Ranger, and there were very few Chinese American Rangers that served in World War II. So it's a book that I call a remembrance book for our current and future generations on the deeds and accomplishments of Chinese American World War II veterans. There are also stories that are written by sons, daughters, grandchildren about their veteran father. The Congressional Gold Medal, there's a chapter on the advocacy. And here's a lesson learned in terms, of civics. How do you get the Congressional Gold Medal approved with all the co-sponsors that are needed on the House side and Senate side? It's a civics lesson that our younger folks ought to learn. So those that are interested, just contact me if you'd like a copy of the book, or really going back to the education. One of the initiatives we've tried to start is we should acquire and donate the book for all our local libraries. So that would be a good start of education.
Yeah.
So I know COCC is going to order the book, and so audience, just we are going to have a set available for you to check out from COCC library. And Mr. Peterson and General Chen and Mr. Gore, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us tonight. And you did an incredible job. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
And dear audience, and we invite you to come to the following events through the month. And on May 10th, a panel discussion with Central Oregon leaders to discuss issues of Asian American and the Pacific Islander communities are facing nationally and in our communities. And on May 14 to 15, a virtual film party to screen the Oscar-winning film, Minari. And on May 19th, we are hosting a student event to talk about a study abroad. Please visit our website for educational resources and a list of local Asian American and the Pacific Islander business. Folks, please keep supporting our Asian American and the Pacific Islander business. As always, everyone, good night. Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
Night.